My name is Joanna, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in my lawyer's office, watching my sister's face drain of color like someone pulled a plug. Mallory hired private investigators to prove I was lying about our grandmother's will, that I manipulated a dying woman for money, that I was the villain in our family's story. But those investigators found something else entirely. They uncovered evidence of her own financial fraud, a web of lies so tangled that Shed accidentally set a trap and walked right into it herself. She wanted to destroy me. Instead, she destroyed herself. For months, she called me a liar, a manipulator, a thief. She turned our family against me, made me question my own sanity, and now the truth was sitting in a manila folder between us, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. Before we dive into how my sister's vendetta backfired in the most spectacular way possible, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with family drama that got completely out of hand, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Make sure to subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel, and you won't want to miss what happens when the investigators realized who the real criminal was. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 6 months before that moment in the lawyer's office, I stood in my grandmother's house in Charleston, wearing a black dress that felt too tight, surrounded by family members who wouldn't meet my eyes. Grandmother Rose had passed away after a brief battle with pneumonia, and the grief sat heavy in my chest like a stone. She'd been my refuge growing up, the one person who saw me for who I really was. I spent every summer at her lake house in North Carolina, learning to garden alongside her, my hands in the dirt while she told me stories about her own childhood. We talked on the phone every Sunday evening without fail, conversations that ranged from recipes to relationship advice to her concerns about various family members. Mallory, my older sister by 4 years, had always been different with Grandma Rose. She visited on major holidays, stayed for a few hours, took obligatory photos for social media, and left. But in public, Mallory played the role of devoted granddaughter perfectly, posting throwback photos with captions about how much she cherished our grandmother, how she was her biggest inspiration. The day after the funeral, we gathered in Grandmother Rose's living room for the reading of the will. The lawyer, a silver-haired man named Mr. Pemberton who'd known our family for decades, sat in the wingback chair that had been Grandma's favorite spot. My parents, Kenneth and Beatrice, sat on the sofa. Mallory and her husband Preston took the love seat, and I perched on the ottoman, still numb from crying. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat and began reading the legal language, and at first, everything seemed standard. Small bequests to various charities, personal items distributed among family members. Then he got to the major assets. The lake house in North Carolina, the one where Eid spent countless summers, the one worth approximately $450,000 according to the recent appraisal, was left entirely to me. Additionally, Grandmother Rose had left me her investment portfolio, a collection of stocks and bonds Shed carefully managed over the years, valued at approximately $200,000. Mallory received a cash inheritance of $100,000 and grandmother's jewelry collection, which had significant sentimental value but modest monetary worth. The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at Mr. Pemberton, certain I'd misheard. Mallory's mouth dropped open, her face cycling through expressions so quickly I couldn't track them all. Shock, confusion, and then something darker settled in her eyes. She stood up so abruptly that Preston had to steady himself on the love seat. "That's impossible," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "There must be a mistake. Grandma wouldn't have done that." Mr. Pemberton, unflappable as ever, pulled out copies of the will. "The will is entirely legitimate, Miss Hartwell. I mean, Mrs. Joanna. It was executed 8 months ago, properly witnessed by 2 individuals unrelated to the family and notarized. Your grandmother was of sound mind and made her wishes very clear." Mallory turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before. Pure rage. "What did you do?" she demanded. "How did you manipulate her? What lies did you tell?" I felt my face flush hot. I didn't do anything. I had no idea Grandma was planning this. My mother stood up, her hands fluttering nervously at her sides. "There must be some mistake," she echoed Mallory's words. "Rose wouldn't have created such an imbalance." My father looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat but saying nothing. Had always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided confrontation at all costs, and I could see him retreating into that familiar role now. Mallory wasn't finished. She pointed at me like I was something dirty shed found on her shoe. You spent all that time with her, whispering in her ear, making her think I didn't care. You poisoned her against me. The accusation hit me like a slap. That's not fair and you know it, I said, my voice shaking. I spent time with Grandma because I loved her, not because I wanted anything from her. Preston put his hand on Mallory's arm, trying to calm her down, but she shook him off. We're going to contest this, she announced. We're going to prove you coerced her, that she wasn't in her right mind. Mr. Pemberton's expression hardened. Mrs. Hartwell, I assure you that your grandmother was entirely competent. I met with her multiple times to discuss these arrangements, and she was very deliberate in her choices. But Mallory was already grabbing her purse, heading for the door. You haven't heard the last of this, she threw over her shoulder. The next day, I went to work at the accounting firm where I'd been employed for 6 years, trying to focus on spreadsheets and client reports, anything to distract me from the disaster unfolding in my family. My boss, Randall, called me into his office mid-morning. He looked uncomfortable, straightening papers on his desk unnecessarily. Joanna, I received a strange phone call this morning, he said carefully. From your sister. She said some concerning things about your mental state and suggested you might be facing legal troubles related to elder abuse. My stomach dropped. That's completely false, I managed to say. There's a dispute over my grandmother's will, but I didn't do anything wrong. Randall nodded slowly. I believe you. But I wanted to give you a heads up that someone is making calls about you. It might be wise to handle this quickly. I left his office feeling sick. This was Mallory's first real attack, and she'd gone straight for my livelihood. Within a week of the will reading, I started getting worried texts from extended family members. My cousin Bridget was the first to reach out directly. She sent me screenshots of a group text Mallory had created that didn't include me. The messages made my blood run cold. Mallory had written paragraph after paragraph about how I'd taken advantage of Grandmother Rose during her decline, how I'd isolated her from the rest of the family, how I'd coerced her into changing her will while she was vulnerable and confused. She used phrases like elder abuse and financial manipulation and legal action pending. Bridget's message to me was simple. I don't believe any of this, but I thought you should know what she's saying. I sat on my apartment floor reading through those screenshots, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Mallory's social media campaign started subtly. She posted vague messages on Facebook with sad face emojis. Things like, sometimes the people you trust most show their true colors. And family isn't always what you think it is. And, when money becomes more important than love. People who didn't know the full story commented with sympathy and support, telling her to stay strong, asking if she needed anything. She never mentioned me by name, but anyone who knew our family would understand exactly who she was talking about. The whisper network in our extended family activated like wildfire. My Aunt Lorraine called me, her voice tight with forced politeness. Joanna, honey, I always thought you were such a sweet girl, but Mallory has been telling us some troubling things. Is there anything you want to explain? I tried to defend myself, explaining that the will was grandmother's choice, that I'd been as surprised as anyone, but I could hear the doubt in Aunt Lorraine's responses. Uncle Gerald simply stopped returning my calls altogether. Cousins I'd been close to suddenly became too busy to meet for coffee. My mother left a voicemail that I must have listened to 20 times, trying to find some hint of support in her words. Joanna, I don't understand why you're being so stubborn about this. Is money really worth destroying this family? Your sister is devastated. Just give her the lake house and we can all move on. The message devastated me more than Mallory's attacks because it came from my own mother, the woman who was supposed to believe in me unconditionally. She didn't ask for my side of the story, didn't question Mallory's narrative, just assumed I was in the wrong and should fix it by giving up what Grandmother Rose had wanted me to have. I called her back, tried to explain, but she interrupted me within 30 seconds. I don't want to hear excuses. I want my daughters to act like sisters. The implication was clear. I was the one failing at being a sister. 2 weeks after the will reading, I received a formal email from Preston, Mallory's husband. The subject line read urgent family matter and the message was professionally worded but unmistakably threatening. He wrote that they'd consulted with attorneys who believed they had grounds to contest the will based on undue influence. He demanded that I agree to split the inheritance equally with Mallory, a 50-50 division of all assets, or they would pursue litigation that could take years and cost all of us far more than the inheritance was worth. The email ended with, "We hope you'll do the right thing and spare the family this painful process." I sat at my kitchen table staring at that email until the words blurred. The right thing, according to them, meant giving up what my grandmother had explicitly wanted. It meant admitting to manipulation I hadn't committed. It meant surrendering to lies. I scheduled a consultation with an estate attorney, a woman named Heather who specialized in inheritance disputes. The consultation cost $300 for 90 minutes, and every minute felt necessary. Heather reviewed the will, asked detailed questions about my relationship with Grandmother Rose and Mallory's behavior, and finally leaned back in her chair. "Legally, you're on solid ground," she said. "The will is properly executed, there's no evidence of incompetence, and you haven't done anything wrong. However, litigation is expensive and emotionally draining. Your sister can file a contest, and even if she ultimately loses, you'll spend months or years dealing with it." She quoted me a retainer fee of $10,000 just to begin defense if Mallory followed through with her threats. $10,000 I hadn't budgeted for, money that would have to come from my savings, all to defend myself against false accusations. The formal complaint came 3 weeks later. Mallory had filed with the estate court claiming undue influence, alleging that Id manipulated Grandmother Rose during a period of mental decline and vulnerability. The legal document was full of accusations that made me sound like a scheming villain from a soap opera. It claimed Id isolated Grandmother from other family members, that Id pressured her to change her will, that Id taken advantage of her grief after Grandfather's death 2 years earlier. None of it was true, but seeing it written in official legal language, filed with a court, made me feel dirty and guilty, even though I'd done nothing wrong. I hired Heather officially, signed papers agreeing to the $10,000 retainer, and began the exhausting process of defending my character and my inheritance. Work became increasingly stressful. My boss Randall pulled me aside again after Id missed a deadline because I was too distracted by the legal battle. "Joanna, I need to know if these family issues are going to affect your performance," he said, not unkindly but with clear concern. "We have clients depending on accurate work, and I can't have errors because your mind is elsewhere." I assured him I'd do better, that I'd keep my personal life separate, but the truth was that the stress followed me everywhere. I couldn't sleep more than 4 or 5 hours a night. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about legal strategies, or replaying conversations with family members, or imagining worst-case scenarios. My anxiety, which had always been manageable, spiked to levels I'd never experienced before. Even my friends seemed uncomfortable around me. When I tried to explain what was happening, I could see their eyes glaze over with the complexity of it all, or worse, I could see them wondering if maybe there was some truth to Mallory's accusations. People don't generally want to believe that someone would lie so elaborately about family, so it's easier to assume there's fault on both sides, that the truth is somewhere in the middle. But the truth wasn't in the middle. The truth was that Id loved my grandmother. Shed made a choice about her assets, and my sister was punishing me for it. The isolation felt suffocating. I'd come home to my apartment, make dinner for one, sit on my couch scrolling through social media seeing Mallory's continued subtle posts about betrayal and family loyalty, and feel completely alone in the world. Then something unexpected happened. Celeste, Preston's sister, reached out to me privately through a direct message on social media. We'd met a handful of times at family gatherings but weren't close. Her message was brief but powerful. "I don't know you well, but I know my brother and Mallory. I've never trusted her, and I don't believe what she's saying about you. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." It was the first genuine support I'd received from anyone connected to the situation, and I cried reading it. We met for coffee the following weekend, and Celeste told me things about Mallory and Preston's marriage that started to paint a very different picture of my sister's motivations. "They live way beyond their means," she confided. "The house, the cars, the private school for the kids. Preston's business does okay, but not well enough to support that lifestyle. I've always wondered where the money was really coming from." That conversation planted the first seed of suspicion in my mind, though I had no idea then just how deep the deception ran. 2 months into the legal battle, Mr. Pemberton called me with a request. He needed certain financial documents from Grandmother Rose's house to submit to the court as evidence of her financial competence and clear decision-making. I still had keys to the house since I'd been helping maintain it after her death. I drove to Charleston on a Saturday morning, the house eerily quiet without her presence. Everything was exactly as Shed left it. Her reading glasses on the side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter, the smell of her lavender sachets still faint in the air. I went to her desk in the study, the organized space where Shed managed all her affairs with characteristic precision. Looking through the drawers for the documents Mr. Pemberton needed, I found a file folder labeled Financial Records in grandmother's neat handwriting. Inside were bank statements going back several years, and as I flipped through them, a pattern emerged that made my chest tighten. Regular withdrawals, always made out to Mallory, ranging from $2,000 to $5,000, appearing almost monthly for the past 3 years. The memo lines on the checks said things like loan, emergency, temporary help, and as discussed. I sat down hard in grandmother's desk chair and started adding up the amounts. The total came to approximately $170,000. $170,000 that my grandmother had given to Mallory over 3 years, money that had never been mentioned, never been disclosed to the family. I kept digging through the file and found printed emails, pages of correspondence between Grandmother Rose and Mallory. The emails were heartbreaking. Mallory would write pleading messages about unexpected expenses, Preston's business having a slow month, needing help with the mortgage, the kids' school tuition coming due. Each email promised this would be the last time, that they'd pay her back soon, that they just needed to get through this rough patch. Grandmother's responses started out sympathetic and generous, but gradually became more concerned and reluctant. In one email from about a year ago, Grandmother wrote, "Mallory, I'm worried about how much you're relying on these loans. This is the 8th time this year you've asked for help. Have you and Preston considered speaking with a financial advisor?" Mallory's response deflected, blamed unexpected car repairs and medical bills, promised again that things would stabilize. The most recent email in the stack was from 3 months before Grandmother's death, and it changed everything I understood about the situation. Mallory had asked for $20,000, calling it absolutely urgent and saying they'd lose the house without it. Grandmother Rose's response was firm in a way I'd never seen from her gentle nature. "I cannot keep doing this. I've given you almost everything I saved over the past 3 years. I'm worried you and Preston are involved in something beyond normal financial difficulties. This isn't healthy, and I can't enable it anymore. Please talk to Preston about proper budgeting and consider whether you're living within your means. I love you, but I have to say no." The email was dated, time-stamped, saved as proof that my grandmother's mind had been sharp and her concerns legitimate. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands shaking as I documented page after page of evidence. This explained so much. This was why Grandmother had restructured her will. She wasn't playing favorites or being manipulated by me. She was protecting her assets from being drained completely by Mallory's financial irresponsibility or worse. The revelation sat heavy in my stomach. Part of me felt vindicated, finally having concrete evidence that would prove my innocence. But another part felt deeply sad for my grandmother, who'd been put in an impossible position by a granddaughter taking advantage of her generosity. I carefully returned everything to the folder and took it with me to show Heather, my attorney. Heather reviewed the documents with a legal eye, nodding slowly as she flipped through pages. "This is excellent evidence," she said. "It demonstrates that your grandmother was mentally competent, financially aware, and had legitimate reasons for structuring her will the way she did. It also shows a pattern of financial dependency from your sister that undermines her claim that the inheritance was unexpected or unfair." She looked at me seriously. "The question is, do you want to introduce this evidence now, or hold it in reserve?" I thought about it carefully. Bringing out these documents would humiliate Mallory publicly, would expose her financial situation to the entire family, would escalate the conflict to a new level. Let's keep it for defense only, I decided. If I can avoid destroying her publicly, I'd prefer to. Maybe Shell dropped the case on her own. That hope died quickly. A week later, Mallory's attorney filed a motion for a posthumous mental competency evaluation of Grandmother Rose. They wanted to interview her doctors, her neighbors, her friends, anyone who'd interacted with her in the final years of her life. They wanted to build a case that she'd been declining mentally, that she'd been vulnerable to manipulation, that her decision-making had been impaired. The motion made me physically ill. They were going to drag my grandmother's memory through the mud, interview people and ask them leading questions designed to make an intelligent, capable woman seem incompetent. It felt like a violation of everything she'd been. I called my mother after receiving notice of the motion, my anger finally breaking through. Did you know that Mallory borrowed over $170,000 from Grandma in the last 3 years? I asked without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. That's ridiculous, my mother finally said, but her voice wavered with uncertainty. You're making things up now to justify keeping everything for yourself. The accusation stung worse because I could hear that she didn't quite believe it herself, that she was choosing to disbelieve me rather than face what it might mean. I have bank statements and emails, Mom, I said quietly. I have proof. Grandma was lending Mallory money constantly, and she finally had to cut her off. That's why she changed the will. Not because of anything I did. Another long silence. I don't want to hear about this, my mother said finally. You're turning this family against each other. She hung up before I could respond. My father called that evening, which was unusual. He rarely initiated conversations about difficult topics, preferring to let my mother handle family conflicts. Joanna, he said, his voice tired. I don't know what to believe anymore. Your mother is upset, Mallory is upset, and you're upset. I just want my family to get along. It wasn't the support I desperately needed. He wasn't saying he believed me or that he'd look at the evidence. He was just expressing exhaustion with the whole situation, putting equal blame on everyone involved, rather than trying to determine what was actually true. Dad, I can show you the bank statements, I offered. You can see for yourself what was happening, he sighed heavily. I don't think that would help. It would just make me feel like I have to choose sides. The conversation ended shortly after, and I felt the particular loneliness of not being believed by your own father, even when you have proof in your hands. 3 months into the court battle, I started noticing things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A silver sedan parked across from my apartment building, same spot, multiple days in a row. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, someone visiting a neighbor maybe, but the car was always empty when I left for work, and occupied by the same person when I returned home. A man with dark hair, always looking down at something in his lap, but I could feel his attention on me. When I left my apartment building, head raised what looked like a camera. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that the stress was making me see threats where none existed, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. My friend Deirdre came over for dinner on a Wednesday evening, and when she arrived, she immediately said, "Who's that creepy guy in the silver car?" Relief washed over me that I wasn't imagining it. You see him too? I asked. Deirdre nodded, looking concerned. Has been sitting there since I pulled up 20 minutes ago. That's weird, right? We watched from my window as the car sat there for another hour before finally driving away. I barely slept that night, getting up repeatedly to check if the car had returned. The next morning, I took a photo of the license plate and the man's face as I walked to my car, figuring if something happened to me, at least there would be some record. The following week, the silver sedan was replaced by a black SUV with a different person inside, this time a woman with short blonde hair and professional-looking camera equipment visible on her passenger seat. She followed me to the grocery store, to the gym, to my office, to a coffee shop where I met a friend. The constant surveillance made me feel violated and unsafe in a way I'd never experienced. I couldn't relax anywhere, constantly checking over my shoulder, wondering who was watching and what they were hoping to catch me doing. My anxiety, already elevated from the legal battle, spiked to new levels. I started having panic attacks in my car before going into work, my chest tight and breath shallow, convinced something terrible was about to happen. I called Heather, my attorney, and described what was happening. She listened carefully and then said something that both validated my concerns and made them worse. It sounds like your sister might have hired private investigators, she said. It's legal as long as they're not trespassing or harassing you directly. They're probably looking for evidence of lifestyle beyond your means, questionable behavior, anything that might support a narrative that you're financially desperate or ethically compromised. The idea that Mallory had gone to such lengths, had spent money on professional surveillance, made the whole situation feel surreal. What did she think they were going to find? Me buying expensive things I couldn't afford? Meeting with shady characters? Living some secret double life? The investigators weren't subtle. And maybe that was intentional, meant to intimidate me or make me nervous enough to slip up somehow. They appeared everywhere. A colleague at work, Dwight, stopped by my desk one afternoon looking uncomfortable. "Hey, someone came to reception this morning asking about you," he said quietly. Claimed they were verifying employment history for a background check. It seemed off, so I thought you should know. My face burned with embarrassment. My professional life was being investigated. People at my workplace were being asked questions about me. My reputation was being examined by strangers looking for dirt. Later that week, my boss Randall called me into his office again. "Someone called asking about your reliability and job performance," he said, his expression concerned. I gave a positive reference because it's the truth. "But what's going on, Joanna? Is everything okay?" I assured him it was just related to the inheritance dispute and that there was nothing to worry about, but I could see the doubt creeping into his expression, the natural human tendency to wonder if where there's smoke, there might be fire. The investigators even contacted my neighbors, which I discovered when my elderly neighbor Mrs. Fletcher knocked on my door one evening. She was a sweet woman in her 70s, who'd lived in the building for decades and always had kind words for everyone. "Dear, I wanted to tell you that someone came asking questions about you today," she said, wringing her hands nervously. "They wanted to know if you had expensive purchases delivered, if you had visitors late at night, if you seemed disturbed or upset. I told them you were a lovely, quiet neighbor and to leave you alone, but I thought you should know." I thanked her, feeling humiliated that my neighbors were being interrogated about my private life. Then came the most humiliating contact. My ex-boyfriend Marcus, someone I'd dated 2 years ago and hadn't spoken to since we amicably ended things, sent me a text out of the blue. "Hey, this is weird, but someone called me today asking about our relationship and your financial situation when we were dating. Did you do something wrong? What's going on?" I had to explain the entire situation via text to someone who was essentially a stranger now, revealing family dysfunction and legal battles to someone I'd once been intimate with but no longer had any connection to. Every layer of my life was being peeled back and examined by people hired to find evidence I was a bad person. The constant surveillance was affecting my mental health in ways I couldn't control. I stopped opening my curtains, living in artificial dimness even during beautiful days. I started taking different routes to work, checking constantly for cars that might be following. I'd go to the grocery store and find myself scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be watching. Sleep became nearly impossible. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing through scenarios where investigators twisted innocent actions into something sinister. The therapist I'd started seeing after the will reading recommended anxiety medication, concerned about how elevated my stress levels had become. I resisted at first, not wanting to admit I needed chemical help to cope, but eventually filled the prescription because I couldn't function at work or maintain any semblance of normal life under that constant weight of surveillance. My cousin Bridget noticed how bad things had gotten when we met for coffee, and I kept glancing around the shop, checking faces, looking for anyone who might be watching. "You need to get away from your apartment for a while," she said firmly. "Come stay with me. At least then you're not alone dealing with this." Her offer was the first real kindness anyone had shown me in months, and I almost cried right there in the coffee shop. I stayed at Bridget's house for a week, and the relief of not being alone, of having someone believe me and support me, was immeasurable. We stayed up late talking, and she told me things about Mallory that I'd never known or had forgotten. "She was always jealous of you," Bridget said one night as we sat on her couch drinking wine. "Even when we were kids. You didn't see it because you're not the type to look for that stuff, but the rest of us noticed." I was genuinely surprised. "Jealous of what?" I asked. "I was always the quiet one, the boring one. Mallory was popular and successful and confident." Bridget shook her head. "You were smarter, you were genuinely kind, instead of performing kindness, and Grandma loved you more. Everyone knew it. Mallory would get so mad when Grandma talked about your visits or showed photos of the two of you gardening together. She hated that Grandma preferred you, even though it was her own fault for not putting in effort." This revelation shifted something in my understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about decades of resentment that had finally found an outlet. 4 months into my nightmare, I received a phone call that changed everything. Heather, my attorney, called me mid-afternoon on a Thursday, her voice carrying an unusual note of excitement. I just got off the phone with someone from Sentinel Investigations, she said. That's the firm that's been following you. One of their investigators wants to meet with you privately, without your sister knowing. He says he has information you need to hear. My heart started racing. What could a private investigator working for Mallory possibly want to tell me? Was this some kind of trap? A way to get me to say something incriminating on record? Heather must have sensed my hesitation because she added, I advised him that any meeting would need to include me as your legal representation. He agreed. He sounded legitimate, Joanna, and more importantly, he sounded uncomfortable. I think we should hear what he has to say. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in a neutral part of town, nowhere near my apartment or office. The investigator, a man named Hugh who'd identified himself over the phone, arrived exactly on time. He was the same person I'd seen in the silver sedan weeks earlier, and seeing him up close in civilian context felt surreal. He was probably in his mid-40s, with tired eyes and the kind of face that had seen too much of humanity's worst behavior. He shook both our hands and got straight to the point. Thank you for meeting with me. I want to be clear that I'm here of my own accord, against company protocol, because I have an ethical obligation that supersedes my contract with your sister. He pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. Your sister hired my firm to find evidence that you had committed fraud, manipulation, or any kind of misconduct related to your grandmother's estate, Hugh continued, his voice steady and professional. We conducted a thorough investigation. We looked at your bank records through legal channels, we interviewed people who know you, we followed you to document your daily activities and lifestyle. We were looking for any sign of sudden wealth, extravagant purchases, suspicious meetings, anything that would support your sister's claims. He paused, and something like respect crossed his face. We found absolutely nothing. You're actually, and I mean this with no offense intended, pretty boring. You go to work, you go home, you buy groceries, you meet friends for coffee, your bank account shows a regular salary and normal expenses. There is no evidence whatsoever that you did anything wrong. I felt a rush of vindication so strong it made me dizzy, but I could tell he wasn't finished. However, Hugh said, and his expression darkened, during our investigation, we follow standard practice of vetting our clients as well. We protect ourselves from being used in illegal schemes by doing background checks on the people who hire us. When we ran a deeper check on your sister and her husband, we found some serious red flags. He opened the folder and pulled out documents. Preston Hartwell runs an investment consulting firm called Hartwell Financial Consulting. The firm has numerous complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau and several state regulatory agencies. Clients report investing money based on promises of guaranteed returns, but those returns never materialize. Some clients report being unable to withdraw their principal investments. The pattern is consistent with what we call a Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while actually generating no legitimate profits. My mouth went dry. I'd known Preston's business was doing okay according to Celeste, but I'd never imagined it might be actually criminal. Hugh wasn't done. We also obtained access to business emails through legal discovery related to one of the complaints. Your sister Mallory handles the bookkeeping for Hartwell Financial. We found emails where she's creating fake account statements, documents showing profits and returns that don't exist. She's falsifying financial records to deceive investors about the performance of their accounts. He pulled out printed emails, and I could see Mallory's email address clearly on them. Messages discussing which clients needed statements adjusted, how to make losses look like gains, strategies for delaying withdrawal requests. I couldn't breathe properly. My sister, the one accusing me of fraud and manipulation, was actively engaged in actual fraud. She'd been creating false documents, deceiving investors, helping operate what was essentially a financial crime. How bad is it? Heather asked, her legal mind immediately assessing the situation. Hugh grimaced. Based on what we've uncovered, we estimate they've defrauded investors of somewhere between $3 and $5 million over the past 4 years. Some of these people have lost their retirement savings, college funds for their kids, life savings they invested based on trusting Preston's promises. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just financial mismanagement or living beyond means. This was systematic, deliberate theft from vulnerable people we'd trusted them. Why are you telling us this? I finally managed to ask. Hugh leaned back in his chair, looking genuinely troubled. Because we can't work for someone who's committing fraud. It's against our company ethics and potentially makes us accessories to criminal activity. We've already terminated our contract with your sister. We sent a letter this morning informing her that we're discontinuing our services due to findings uncovered during routine background verification. He slid a business card across the table. More importantly, we've already filed detailed reports with the Federal Trade Commission and your state's Attorney General office. An investigation will be opening into Hartwell Financial Consulting. Your sister and her husband are going to be facing serious criminal charges. He looked at me with something like sympathy. I also wanted you to know, because she hired us to destroy you, and you deserve to understand who you're really dealing with. Heather carefully gathered copies of the documents Hugh provided, making sure everything was properly documented. Is there anything else we should know? She asked. Hugh nodded. When we sent the termination letter this morning, we didn't disclose what WED found, just cited contractual provisions about background check discoveries. But your sister is smart enough to realize that termination right now, at this stage, means we found something bad. She's probably panicking. People who panic do unpredictable things. He looked directly at me. Be careful. Document everything. If she contacts you, record it if you can legally do so in your state. She might try to threaten you, bribe you, or manipulate you now that her world is falling apart. I felt a chill run down my spine. My sister, who'd spent months trying to prove I was a criminal, was about to be exposed as one herself, and shed know that I knew. After Hugh left, Heather and I sat in silence for several minutes. What do I do with this information? I finally asked. The vindication I'd felt earlier was now mixed with something more complex. This was still my sister, still family, and her life was about to implode. Part of me felt satisfaction that the truth was emerging, that karma was real, but another part felt sick about what this would do to her children, to our parents, to the family structure that was already fractured. Heather's advice was practical. You do nothing publicly. Let the authorities handle their investigation. If you go public with this information now, it looks like revenge, and Mallory's attorneys could potentially argue that you're interfering with her ability to get fair legal representation. Stay quiet, keep this evidence safe, and let the legal process unfold naturally. It was sound advice, but staying quiet when I'd been publicly accused for months felt almost impossible. Still, I agreed. I'd waited this long for truth to surface. I could wait a little longer for it to fully emerge. 2 weeks after my meeting with Hugh, the first cracks in Mallory's facade became visible to the rest of the family. The family group chat, which had been a constant stream of Mallory's posts about the importance of family values and her legal battle for justice, suddenly went silent. Days passed without a single message from her, which was unprecedented. She'd been posting multiple times daily for months, sharing articles about elder abuse and undue influence, making vague statements about staying strong through adversity. The abrupt silence was deafening. My cousin Bridget texted me privately. Have you noticed Mallory's gone completely quiet? Also, she deleted her entire Facebook account. Something's definitely happening. I played ignorant, responding that I hadn't noticed, but internally I was tracking every sign that the investigation was progressing. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with confusion and worry. Joanna, something's wrong with your sister, she said. She won't answer my calls, and when I went by the house, she looked terrible. She said everything was fine, but I could tell she was lying. Do you know if something happened with the court case? I carefully navigated the conversation, not wanting to lie but not able to share what I knew. I haven't heard anything new about the case, Mom, I said truthfully. Maybe you should ask her directly what's going on. My mother made a frustrated sound. I did ask, and she snapped at me, said I wouldn't understand. I've never seen her like this. There was a long pause. You don't think this has anything to do with Preston's business, do you? Has been very stressed lately too. I felt a chill. I don't know anything about Preston's business, I said, which was technically true. I didn't know the specifics of how it operated, only that it was fraudulent. The legal battle took an unexpected turn when Mallory's attorney filed an emergency motion claiming that I had sent threatening and intimidating messages to Mallory. The motion was complete fiction, alleging that I'd texted her threats about exposing family secrets and that I'd driven by her house multiple times in an act of harassment. The accusations were so absurd that even Heather seemed taken aback. This is desperate, she said, reviewing the filing. These are serious allegations that could result in a restraining order if they were true, but they're easily disprovable. We pulled my phone records, showing that I hadn't contacted Mallory at all in months. We gathered evidence of my location during the times I'd allegedly driven by her house, proving I was at work or home nowhere near her neighborhood. The motion was so transparently false that the judge sanctioned Mallory's attorney during the next hearing, warning that frivolous filings could result in dismissal of her entire case and additional penalties. Then everything changed publicly. A local newspaper in our area ran a headline that made my stomach drop even though I'd known it was coming. Investment firm under federal investigation for fraud. The article, named Hartwell Financial Consulting, described allegations of a Ponzi scheme and mentioned that federal agents were interviewing victims and examining financial records. The article noted that potentially hundreds of victims had lost millions of dollars to the scheme. It didn't name Preston directly in the headline, but he was identified in the third paragraph as the company's founder and primary operator. I read the article 3 times, my hands shaking. This was real now. This wasn't just something Hugh had told me in private. This was public knowledge, spreading through our community like wildfire. The family group chat, silent for weeks, suddenly exploded with activity. Aunt Lorraine was the first to send a link to the article with just a question mark. Then came Uncle Gerald's message, "Is this Preston's company?" followed immediately by another message from him. "We invested $50,000 with him last year. Does this mean we lost everything?" My stomach turned. I hadn't realized that Preston and Mallory had taken money from our own family members. The messages kept coming as different relatives realized the implications. Cousins who'd invested, friends of the family who'd trusted Preston based on family connections, people who'd believed in him because Mallory had vouched for his integrity. The betrayal was exponentially worse than just defrauding strangers. They'd stolen from family. My father called me that evening, his voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Joanna, did you know about this?" he asked. "Did you know what Preston was doing?" I chose my words carefully. "I heard rumors recently that there might be problems with his business, but I didn't know details, and I didn't want to spread unverified information that might be wrong. It was the truth, just not the complete truth." My father was silent for a long moment. "Your Uncle Gerald is devastated. That was his retirement savings. He trusted Preston because he's family." The weight of that statement hung between us. Then my father said something that surprised me. "I need to apologize to you. Your mother and I were wrong to doubt you without evidence. We chose to believe Mallory's version of events because it seemed easier than believing our daughter would lie about something so serious. But if she could do this to people who trusted her, then maybe everything you've been saying about the inheritance situation was true." It wasn't a complete apology, and it didn't undo months of pain, but it was something. My mother, however, remained in denial. She called an hour after my father, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "Joanna, you did this, didn't you?" she accused without preamble. "You set them up somehow. You were so angry about Mallory challenging the will that you made up these allegations to destroy her." I was so shocked I couldn't respond for several seconds. "Mom, I didn't do anything," I finally said. "This is a federal investigation. Do you really think I have the power or resources to fabricate something like this?" She wasn't listening. "If you hadn't been so greedy about keeping all the inheritance for yourself, none of this would have happened. Mallory wouldn't have been so stressed, Preston wouldn't have felt so much pressure, and they wouldn't have made whatever mistakes they made." The twisted logic was staggering. Somehow, in my mother's mind, my existence and my refusal to give in to false accusations had caused my sister to commit fraud. I tried one more time to reason with her. "Mom, Preston's business problem started years before Grandma died. This has nothing to do with the inheritance." But Shed already made up her mind. "I don't want to talk to you right now," she said coldly. "I need to focus on helping your sister through this nightmare." She hung up, and I sat holding my phone, feeling the final thread connecting me to my mother's approval snap completely. My therapist would later tell me that this was actually a form of liberation, that I could finally stop seeking validation from someone who would never give it. But in that moment, it just felt like another loss in a year full of losses. Bridget texted me after the news broke. "Justice, finally." Celeste, Preston's sister, sent a longer message. "I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't realize it was this bad. Thank you for being kind to me when I reached out." You didn't have to be, given that this is my brother's mess. These small gestures of support kept me grounded as I watched my sister's world collapse in real time. A week after the newspaper article, federal agents raided Preston and Mallory's house. A neighbor recorded video on their phone, and within hours, it was circulating on local social media groups. The video showed agents in FBI jackets carrying boxes of documents out of the house, loading them into unmarked vans. Mallory was visible in the background, sitting on the front steps crying, her hands covering her face. Preston was led out in handcuffs, the classic perp walk captured from multiple angles. The local evening news ran the story with updated details. Preston had been arrested on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The reporter noted that his wife was also under investigation, with charges potentially pending depending on the outcome of evidence analysis. They showed Preston's booking photo, and seeing it made everything feel surreal. This was my brother-in-law, someone I'd sat across from at holiday dinners, someone who'd seemed successful and confident, now reduced to a mugshot on the 6 o'clock news. As I watched the coverage, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that the truth was emerging, but also genuine sadness. This was still my sister's husband, the father of my niece and nephew. Those kids were going to grow up with this scandal attached to their family name. Despite everything Mallory had done to me, despite the months of false accusations and public humiliation, watching her life implode gave me no real joy. I'd wanted her to stop attacking me, wanted the truth about the inheritance to be acknowledged, wanted my family to see that I'd been telling the truth all along, but I hadn't wanted this complete destruction. My therapist helped me process the guilt I felt for feeling satisfied at all. You can acknowledge that she brought this on herself, while also feeling empathy for the consequences, she said. Those two things can coexist. You're not a bad person for feeling vindicated when someone who attacked you faces accountability for their actual crimes. The permission to feel complex emotions about the situation helped me navigate the weeks that followed. A week after Preston's arrest and the raid on their home, my phone rang with a number I'd deleted months ago but still recognized, Mallory's cell phone. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering, my heart pounding. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Mallory's voice sounded completely different from the confident, accusatory tone she'd used for months. Now she sounded small and broken. "Joanna, please don't hang up," she said immediately. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet in person?" Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but curiosity and some remaining thread of familial obligation made me agree. "Public place only," I said. "How about the coffee shop on Elm Street?" She agreed quickly, almost desperately. I called Heather before going to meet Mallory. My attorney's advice was clear. Don't admit to anything, don't make any promises, and if possible, record the conversation on your phone. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, so you can legally record without telling her. I set my phone to record and drove to the coffee shop, my stomach in knots. I arrived early and chose a table near the window where other people could see us, following Heather's advice to stay visible and safe. When Mallory walked in 15 minutes later, I barely recognized her. She'd always been meticulously groomed, perfectly dressed, the kind of person who looked put together even running errands. Now she looked haggard. She'd lost noticeable weight, her clothes hung loosely, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked like she'd aged 10 years in a few weeks. She sat down across from me without ordering anything, her hands trembling as she folded them on the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mallory said 2 words I never expected to hear from her. "I'm sorry." I waited, saying nothing, watching her struggle to continue. "I'm sorry for everything," she continued, her voice cracking. "I know you didn't do anything wrong to Grandma. I always knew. The accusations, the investigation, all of it was lies." Hearing her admit it out loud, after months of being called a liar and manipulator, should have felt more satisfying than it did. Instead, I just felt tired. "Then why?" I asked simply. Mallory's face crumpled, tears starting to fall. "Because I was desperate. Preston's business has been failing for 2 years. We've been living on credit cards and loans, trying to keep up appearances. We had the big house, the nice cars, the private school for the kids, the country club membership. Everyone thought we were successful, and I couldn't let them see the truth. She explained in a self-pitying tone that grated on my nerves how they'd borrowed from grandmother repeatedly to cover basic expenses while maintaining their expensive lifestyle. When Grandma finally cut us off, I panicked, Mallory said. I thought if I could get the lake house, we could sell it and use the money to fix everything, to cover the losses in Preston's business and get back on track. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I never meant for things to go this far. I thought you'd just give in, that you'd want to avoid family conflict and split everything with me, but you kept fighting, and I got desperate. I hired the investigators thinking they'd find something, anything, that would make you look bad enough that the family would pressure you to settle. I leaned back in my chair, maintaining emotional distance even as I listened. So you tried to destroy my reputation, cost me thousands in legal fees, stress me to the point of needing anxiety medication, all because you were hoping I'd give you money to cover up fraud. My voice was calmer than I felt. Mallory flinched at the word fraud. I didn't know how bad things were with Preston's business, she said, though her eyes darted away as she spoke, and I knew she was lying. I just did the bookkeeping. I didn't ask questions about where the money came from. That was absolutely false based on the emails Hugh had shown me. But I didn't contradict her. She continued, her desperation becoming more apparent. I don't understand how it got so out of control. Preston said everything was fine, that it was just temporary cash flow problems, that new investors would fix everything. Then came the real reason for this meeting. Mallory leaned forward, her hands reaching across the table toward me, though she didn't quite touch me. Joanna, I need your help, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. The prosecutors are saying I could face 10 to 15 years in prison. They're treating me like I was a full partner in Preston's scheme, but I wasn't. I just did what my husband told me to do. I need you to talk to them. Tell them I wasn't really involved, that I didn't understand what was happening. She was actually asking me to lie to federal prosecutors on her behalf, to commit a crime to save her from the consequences of her own crimes. The audacity was breathtaking. Please, she continued when I didn't respond. I'll drop the inheritance case immediately. I'll tell everyone in the family that you were right about everything, that I lied about you. I'll do whatever you want. Just please help me avoid prison. My kids need me. The mention of her children was clearly calculated to pull on my emotions, to make me feel guilty for their suffering, and it partially worked. I did feel terrible for my niece and nephew, who were innocent victims in all of this. But feeling bad for them didn't mean I should help their mother avoid accountability for fraud. Mallory, even if I wanted to help you, I don't have any influence with prosecutors, I said carefully. I'm not involved in the investigation. I'm not a witness. They're not going to care what I think about your level of involvement. This was technically true, though Hugh had mentioned that the fraud victim's attorney might want me to testify about character issues at some point. Mallory's face showed panic. But you could try. You could write a letter or something, saying that I've always been a good person, that this isn't like me. I looked at my sister across the table. This person I'd grown up with, played with as a child, shared holidays and family memories with, and I genuinely didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a tug of sympathy despite everything she'd done. She looked so broken, so desperate, and somewhere under all the terrible choices was still the sister who'd taught me to ride a bike when I was 6. But a larger part of me remembered the last 6 months, the false accusations, the public humiliation, the isolation, the anxiety attacks, the surveillance, the damage to my reputation and career. Where was this concern for consequences when you were destroying my life? I asked quietly. Where was your worry about hurting people when you were helping Preston steal from investors, including our own uncle? Mallory's expression shifted, frustration breaking through the desperate pleading. That's different, she said. I made mistakes, but am not a bad person. I was trying to protect my family. The lack of self-awareness was stunning. By stealing from other families, I asked. By committing fraud that destroyed people's retirement savings. She pulled back, her face hardening slightly. You don't understand what it's like to have the kind of pressure I was under. You've always had it easy. You never had to worry about maintaining appearances or living up to expectations. You're fine with your little apartment and your boring life, but I needed more than that. There it was, the truth under all the desperation. She still believed she was entitled to more, that her need for status and appearance justified her actions. I stood up, done with the conversation. I need time to think about this, I said, though I already knew what my answer would be. Mallory stood too, hope flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quickly. "Thank you for considering it. I know I don't deserve your help after everything, but I'm begging you." I left without responding, walking to my car with my phone still recording in my pocket. Once inside my car, I sat for several minutes processing the conversation. I felt no satisfaction from seeing her broken and desperate. I felt no desire for further revenge. But I also felt no obligation to save her from consequences she'd brought entirely on herself. That evening, I called my therapist for an emergency session. "I don't know what to do," I told her, explaining the meeting and Mallory's request. My therapist listened carefully before responding. "What do you need to do for yourself, Joanna? Not for your sister. Not for your parents. Not to prove anything to anyone. What do you need for your own peace and healing?" The question reframed everything. What I needed was to stop being pulled into my sister's drama, to stop being responsible for fixing messes I hadn't created, to finally put my own well-being first. "I need to let this go," I said slowly. "I need to let the legal system handle it without getting involved." My therapist agreed. "You don't owe her your help, especially after she spent months trying to destroy you. That doesn't make you cruel or cold. It makes you someone with healthy boundaries." I texted Mallory later that night, keeping the message brief and clear. "I can't help with the prosecutors. I'm not involved in that investigation, and I don't have any influence over their decisions. I hope you're able to work things out with your attorney, but I can't be part of that process." Her response came within minutes. "So that's it? You're just going to let me go to prison when you could help? You really are as selfish and cold as I always said you were. I guess Grandma was wrong about you having integrity. Even in her moment of greatest need, even after admitting she'd lied about me for months, she couldn't resist one final attack." The message was so predictably Mallory that I almost laughed. I blocked her number, and finally felt something release in my chest. A tension I'd been carrying for months. I was done. I was finally completely done trying to prove myself to people who would never believe me. Done sacrificing my peace for family members who saw me as a tool or an obstacle rather than a person. 2 months after Mallory's desperate coffee shop meeting, the legal consequences became official and public. Preston accepted a plea deal rather than face trial, pleading guilty to 14 counts of fraud-related charges. The sentencing hearing was covered by local news. The judge gave him 12 years in federal prison, citing the extensive harm done to victims and the premeditated nature of the fraud scheme. Mallory's case took slightly longer to resolve. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal where she accepted responsibility for her role in falsifying documents and deceiving investors. In exchange for her cooperation and testimony that portrayed her as less central to the scheme than Preston, she received a sentence of 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She would also be required to pay restitution to victims. Though given that they'd lost everything, the likelihood of her ever being able to pay back millions was essentially zero. The consequences for Mallory extended far beyond the prison sentence. Their house went into foreclosure, unable to maintain the mortgage payments without income. The luxury cars were repossessed. The country club membership was obviously revoked. The private school sent a letter explaining that they could no longer accommodate the children given the non-payment of tuition and the publicity surrounding the case. Mallory and Preston's children, my niece and nephew, who I'd barely gotten to know because of the family conflict, moved to a different state to live with Preston's parents. The social fall from grace was total and absolute. Friends who'd admired their lifestyle and success suddenly had never been that close. Social media connections disappeared. The community that had once embraced them now treated them as pariahs. The inheritance case was officially withdrawn. Mallory's attorney filed paperwork, dropping all claims against the estate, and finally, after 6 months of legal battle, I received clear title to the lake house and full access to the investment portfolio. The victory I'd been fighting for all this time felt hollow. I'd won, but what had I actually won? The legal fees had cost me $15,000 total. The emotional toll had cost far more. I'd lost months of sleep, developed anxiety severe enough to require medication, damaged relationships with family members, and spent half a year looking over my shoulder afraid of surveillance. The inheritance was mine, but it came with scars I'd carry for a long time. Family dynamics had shifted permanently. Some relatives came forward with apologies. Uncle Gerald sent me a heartfelt letter acknowledging that he should have believed me from the beginning, that Head let his own financial stress and disappointment make him susceptible to Mallory's lies. "You deserved better from all of us," he wrote. "I'm sorry for doubting you when you were telling the truth all along." Aunt Lorraine sent a card with a similar message, along with a gift card to my favorite restaurant as a small gesture of apology. These acknowledgments helped, but they couldn't undo the months where Id felt completely alone and unsupported by people Id loved and trusted. My parents remained the most complicated relationship. My father had apologized in his way, admitting He'd been wrong to doubt me, but he hadn't pushed back against my mother's continued reluctance to fully acknowledge what had happened. My mother never sent an apology. Instead, she sent carefully worded emails that avoided the topic entirely, asking how I was doing in general terms without ever mentioning the inheritance battle or acknowledging her role in making it worse. The closest she came to acknowledgement was telling other family members, according to Bridget, who reported back to me, that if Joanna had just agreed to share the inheritance initially, none of this would have happened. She was still making my existence and my refusal to capitulate to false accusations the root cause of Mallory's criminal behavior. The twisted logic would have been funny if it wasn't so hurtful. I made a difficult decision about my relationship with my parents. I would maintain minimal contact, attend major holidays if I felt up to it, but I would stop trying to earn their approval or validation. My therapist had been working with me on this concept for months. The idea that I could love my parents while also acknowledging that they would never be the supportive, believing parents I needed them to be. "You get to choose how much energy you invest in relationships that consistently hurt you," she said. "Loving someone doesn't mean accepting treatment that damages your mental health." I started declining Sunday dinners, stopped initiating calls, and created firm boundaries around topics I would and wouldn't discuss. It felt simultaneously liberating and sad, like closing a door I'd hoped would stay open, but that had been letting in cold wind for too long. Surprisingly, other relationships grew stronger. Cousin Bridget became genuinely close, more like a sister than a cousin. Shed stood by me throughout the entire ordeal, and Wed developed a bond forged in shared honesty and mutual support. "You gained a sister and lost a sister," she joked once, though the truth in it made us both a little sad. Celeste, Preston's sister, also became an unlikely friend. She was dealing with her own shame and horror about her brother's crimes, and we helped each other process the complicated emotions of loving family members who'd done terrible things. She never excused Preston's behavior, but she grieved for the brother Shed thought she knew, and I understood that grief more than most people could. Then came an unexpected revelation that changed how I understood everything. Mr. Pemberton, grandmother's attorney, called me 6 months after the inheritance was finalized. "Joanna, I have something your grandmother left for you," he said. She gave me a sealed letter with instructions that it should only be opened if someone contested the will. "Given the circumstances, I believe now is the appropriate time for you to receive it." He mailed it to me in a formal envelope with grandmother's handwriting on the front, "For Joanna, to be opened only if my will is disputed." My hands shook as I opened it. The letter was dated 1 month before grandmother's death, when she was still healthy and active, proving her mind had been clear and her intentions deliberate. "My dear Joanna." It began in her familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means that Mallory has challenged my will, exactly as I feared she would. I want you to understand why I made the choices I did, and I want you to have proof that these choices came from love and wisdom, not from any manipulation on your part." She went on to explain that Shed changed her will after realizing the extent of Mallory's financial problems and suspicions about Preston's business practices. "I've given Mallory almost everything I saved over the past 3 years," she wrote. "I've watched her become increasingly desperate for money, making excuses and promises that were never kept. I don't understand all the details of what Preston is involved in, but I know in my heart that it's dishonest. I've heard enough phone conversations, seen enough worried expressions, to know that something is very wrong." Grandmother continued, "I'm giving you the larger portion of my estate, not because I love you more, though I confess you've always been easier to love. I'm doing this because you have integrity. You will use these resources wisely and well. Mallory would only waste them, or worse, use them to cover up wrongdoing. This is not favoritism, my dear girl. This is protection. I'm protecting what I've worked for from being consumed by whatever darkness has taken root in Mallory's life. And I'm protecting you by giving you resources that I hope will provide security and peace." She ended the letter with, "If you're reading this, you've likely endured terrible accusations from your sister. I'm so sorry. Please know that I saw you clearly, loved you completely, and trust you absolutely. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own goodness. With all my love, Grandma Rose." I cried reading that letter, deep sobs that released months of tension and hurt. My grandmother had known. Shed understood what might happen and had tried to protect me even from beyond death. I called my father immediately and read him the letter over the phone. There was a long silence after I finished. "Dad, she knew," I said. "Grandma knew Mallory was in trouble, knew Preston was doing something wrong, and she tried to prevent this catastrophe. She was protecting all of us." My father's voice was thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, Joanna. Your mother and I were completely wrong. We doubted you without any real evidence, chose to believe Mallory over you because it seemed less complicated. That was cowardly and unfair, and I'm truly sorry." It wasn't a complete apology. It didn't address months of pain or fix everything, but it was genuine. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. "Eventually," I answered honestly, "but not yet. You chose Mallory over me without evidence, and that hurt more than you probably understand. I need time." He accepted that, said he'd wait as long as necessary, and that conversation marked a small opening for future reconciliation, though with very firm boundaries in place. I decided to visit the lake house for the first time as its true and undisputed owner. I drove up on a Friday afternoon, taking a long weekend to spend time in the place that held so many good memories. The house was exactly as grandmother had left it, though the garden had become overgrown during the months of legal battle. I spent Saturday working in that garden, pulling weeds, trimming back plants that had grown wild, clearing space for new growth. It was physically exhausting and emotionally cathartic. As I worked with my hands in the dirt the way grandmother and I had done so many times, I felt her presence and her love in a way that made me cry again, but this time with gratitude rather than grief. I realized something important while working in that garden. This house represented so much more than monetary value or a legal victory. It represented grandmother's validation of who I was, her acknowledgement of my character, her confidence in my future. It was a tangible symbol that someone had seen me clearly and loved what they saw. No amount of money could replicate that feeling. I made a decision right there among the rose bushes. I wouldn't sell the house despite the financial benefit it would provide. This would be my retreat, my sanctuary, the place I'd come to remember where I came from and who I wanted to be. I might rent it out occasionally to help with maintenance costs, but it would stay in the family, a legacy of love rather than a commodity to be liquidated. The final complication came when I received a call from an attorney representing the fraud victims, the people who'd lost money to Preston and Mallory's scheme. They were organizing a civil lawsuit to recover whatever assets possible for restitution to victims. "We're building a case about character and pattern of deception," the attorney explained. "Several victims have come forward saying that Mallory specifically courted them as investors, using her friendly personality and family connections to build trust. Would you be willing to testify about her character, specifically her willingness to deceive people close to her?" I felt conflicted. Testifying would mean publicly detailing how Shed lied about me, which would further destroy whatever remained of her reputation. But these victims, some of whom had lost their life savings, deserved every possible avenue for justice and recovery. I thought about Uncle Gerald, who'd lost $50,000 of his retirement savings because he'd trusted family. I thought about the other investors who'd been promised security and given devastation. I made my decision. "Yes," I told the attorney. "If it will help the victims, I'll testify." This wasn't about revenge against Mallory anymore. She was already facing prison time and had lost everything. This was about accountability and about helping people who'd been genuinely victimized by the scheme Shed participated in. Truth mattered, not just my truth about the inheritance, but the broader truth about the harm Shed caused to innocent people. If my testimony could help them recover even a small portion of their losses, then I had an obligation to provide it. 6 months after all the legal battles concluded, my life had finally found a new equilibrium. I left the accounting firm where I'd worked for 6 years. unable to shake the feeling that my colleagues still wondered about the truth behind all the drama that had surrounded me. I found a position at a smaller company with a more supportive culture, a place where my boss actually checked in about my well-being and meant it. The pay was slightly less, but the reduction in stress was worth far more than the difference in salary. My anxiety, which had been so severe during the investigation and surveillance, had decreased significantly. I still saw my therapist monthly, but we were working on growth and moving forward rather than just surviving crisis. The lake house became my sanctuary in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I started visiting twice a month, sometimes alone for quiet reflection, sometimes bringing friends for weekend gatherings. I hosted Cousin Bridget, my friend Deirdre, and a few members of a support group my therapist had recommended for people dealing with family estrangement. The house filled with laughter and genuine connection, becoming a place of healing rather than a symbol of conflict. I was creating a new definition of family, one based on chosen relationships and mutual respect rather than obligation and shared genetics. It was smaller than the family I'd grown up with, but it was healthier and more authentic. My relationship with my mother remained distant and probably always would be. Shed sent me a brief email several months after everything concluded. "I hope you're well." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her role in making everything harder, just a superficial pleasantry that maintained bare minimum contact. I replied equally briefly, "I am, thank you." I didn't close the door completely because I recognized that I might feel differently in the future, but I also didn't push through or try to force reconciliation. The door remained cracked open, but I wasn't walking through it. My father made more effort, though our relationship would never return to what it had been before. He visited the lake house once, helping me repair the dock without talking much. The work itself became a language between us, his way of showing he was trying to rebuild trust through action rather than words. I appreciated the effort even while recognizing it didn't excuse the past. News about Mallory filtered to me occasionally through family connections, though I didn't seek it out. She was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility. Her children visited monthly, according to what I'd heard through Cousin Bridget. Preston had more than 7 years remaining on his 12-year sentence. Mallory would be eligible for parole in 18 months, and part of me wondered what would happen when she was released. Whether Shed ever truly understand the harm Shed caused, or whether Shed continue to see herself as a victim of circumstances. I'd probably never know, and I'd made peace with that uncertainty. Her understanding or lack thereof wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I found myself thinking about what I'd learned from one of the most difficult periods of my life. The first lesson was simple but profound. Integrity isn't rewarded immediately, but eventually truth emerges. There were months where it seemed like lies would win, where Mallory's false narrative was believed by more people than my truth. But patience and consistency had their own power. The second lesson was about family itself. Family isn't just defined by blood relationships. It's defined by who shows up when things are hard, who believes in you when belief costs something, who stands beside you when it would be easier to walk away. Bridget and Celeste had become more like sisters to me than Mallory ever was. The third lesson was perhaps the hardest to accept. Sometimes people project their worst qualities onto others. Mallory had called me a liar because she was lying. Shed accused me of manipulation because she was manipulating. Shed labeled me a thief while actively stealing from investors. Understanding this pattern didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me stop internalizing her accusations. Her attacks had never really been about me. They'd been about her own guilt and fear reflected outward. The fourth lesson was about control. I couldn't control other people's narratives about me, only my own actions and responses. No matter how much evidence I provided or how articulately I defended myself, some people would choose to believe what was convenient rather than what was true. Learning to accept that limitation had been freeing. The fifth and perhaps most important lesson was about forgiveness and timelines. I'd spent time feeling guilty for not being able to forgive my parents immediately, for still feeling angry at Mallory, for struggling with resentment, even after I'd technically won. My therapist had helped me understand that forgiveness isn't an obligation with a deadline. I might forgive my parents someday, might even reach a place where I could think of Mallory without anger, or I might not. Both outcomes were acceptable. The key was not letting unforgiveness consume me or prevent me from building a good life. I could acknowledge what had happened, set boundaries to protect myself, and still move forward without needing to grant absolution to people who'd hurt me. But the most important lesson came from grandmother's letter. Her real gift to me wasn't the money or the property. It was validation. She'd seen my true character, my integrity, my kindness, and she'd honored it. That knowledge had carried me through the darkest moments when it seemed like everyone believed I was a terrible person. Knowing that one person had truly seen me and loved what they saw gave me strength to weather the storm. That confidence, that rock-solid knowledge that I was a good person regardless of what anyone else said, was worth more than any inheritance. I found myself back at the lake house on a beautiful spring morning, planting new rose bushes in grandmother's garden. Roses had been her favorite, and I'd ordered several varieties from a specialty nursery, determined to restore the garden to its former beauty. As I worked, my elderly neighbor from the house next door, a woman named Opal who'd been friends with grandmother for years, stopped by. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she said, watching me work. I looked up, squinting in the sunlight. "I hope so. I'm trying to honor her memory." Opal smiled, the kind of smile that held years of wisdom. "You already do, dear. By being yourself. That's all she ever wanted." She used to tell me, "Opal, my Joanna has such a good heart. I hope the world doesn't harden it. She'd be happy to see you here. Planting roses. Building a life. That's the best tribute you could give her." The simple truth in those words settled over me like a blessing. The best revenge, if you could even call it that, was living well. I was no longer consumed by anger at Mallory, though I acknowledged I might never fully forgive her either. I'd moved through rage to something closer to indifference mixed with occasional sadness for what could have been. I understood now that Mallory's actions had ultimately destroyed Mallory, not me. She was the one in prison, the one who'd lost everything, the one who'd have to live with the consequences of her choices for the rest of her life. My life, meanwhile, was growing quieter and more peaceful. I had meaningful work, genuine friendships, a sanctuary where I could retreat and remember who I was, and most importantly, I had myself back. I'd learned that life wasn't about waiting for people to apologize or acknowledge their wrongs. Some people never would, and tying my peace to their capacity for accountability would mean never finding peace at all. Instead, life was about building a life that didn't require their validation, creating happiness that existed independent of their approval, finding worth in my own assessment of my character rather than theirs. I no longer needed my mother to say she was wrong, no longer needed Mallory to admit her lies, no longer needed the extended family to apologize for doubting me. Those things would have been nice, but they weren't necessary for my healing. My sister had wanted to prove I was lying, had hired investigators to find evidence of fraud and manipulation, had spent months and thousands of dollars trying to destroy my credibility and reputation. Instead, she'd proven I was exactly who I'd always said I was. Not right about deserving the inheritance. That had never been the point, and never been my choice. Right about having integrity. Right about telling the truth. Right about having character that could withstand scrutiny. Those qualities couldn't be bought, couldn't be stolen, couldn't be faked, no matter how skilled the performance. They were earned through thousands of small choices, daily decisions to be honest even when lies were easier, to be kind even when bitterness was tempting, to maintain my values even when they cost me something. I don't talk to Mallory anymore. She's tried to reach me a few times through intermediary family members, and I've politely declined contact each time. Maybe someday I'll feel differently. Maybe someday there will be genuine accountability on her part, or sufficient healing on mine that we can have some form of relationship. But maybe not, and I've accepted that possibility without guilt. Some relationships, even familial ones, are healthier from a distance or not at all. Setting that boundary wasn't cruel. It was necessary self-preservation, choosing my own mental health and peace over the societal expectation that family should always reconcile regardless of harm caused. As I finished planting the last rose bush and stepped back to admire the garden beginning to return to life, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Peace. Not perfect happiness, not absence of all pain or regret, but genuine peace with where I was and who I'd become through this trial. I'd survived my sister's betrayal, my parents' failure to support me, months of false accusations and public scrutiny, and I'd emerged with my integrity intact and my sense of self stronger than before. That was victory enough. The inheritance was mine legally, but more importantly, my life was mine fully. Id reclaimed my narrative, rebuilt my support system, and redefined what family meant to me. I sleep well at night now. I wake up without dread, go through my days without constantly looking over my shoulder, come home to my apartment without anxiety. That peace, that simple ability to exist without fear or anger consuming me, is worth more than any inheritance, more than any vindication, more than any apology I might never receive. My grandmother gave me financial security through her will, but she gave me something far more valuable through her letter and her lifetime of love. She gave me the knowledge that I was seen, known, and valued exactly as I was. That gift continues to sustain me every single day, and it's the legacy I hope to pass forward to others who might someday need the same validation. So, here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever been falsely accused by someone close to you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments because I'd love to hear how others have navigated similar situations. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button to let me know I'm not alone in experiencing this kind of family drama. Please subscribe to this channel because sharing these real stories helps all of us feel less isolated in our struggles. And share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not crazy for standing up for the truth even when their own family doesn't believe them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope wherever you are in your own journey, whether you're in the middle of your own battle or healing from past ones, you find the peace and validation you deserve. Remember that the truth does eventually emerge, that your integrity is yours to keep regardless of what anyone says, and that you have every right to build a life that protects your peace. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next video.